Hello and welcome to the PMC podcast, where PMC stands for Project Management Conversations. Our guest today is an accomplished project management professional, Mishirika Scott. And I'd prefer to just call her Mai if that's fine.
Yes.
With over a decade of experience, she has been committed to teaching, mentoring, and as looking at how overall advancement of project management practices has been one of her focus areas. So thank you so much, Mai, for taking the time out today and speaking with us.
Of course, I'm excited to be here. Pretty stoked. This is my first podcast, so that makes it that much more special.
All right, I'll make sure you're as comfortable as you can be. All right, so I recently went over a very unique concept that Mai wrote about covering the topic of decisions. And when I went over that article, I was reading a book on decisions and decision making around that time. And I really thought that, having her on the podcast and discussing this topic with her will definitely be something that even our project management community would enjoy. So let's start off, and it would be great if you can talk about what exactly is a clutch moment.
That you know, that is a good question because I think that clutch can mean different things for different people. But for the purposes of the essay that I wrote, the clutch decisions are those on the spot, those decisions that are, there's immense pressure. It is like you got to make a decision right here, right now. All eyes are on you. People will be affected by that decision. There's some level of ambiguity in that decision. Some people find it a space that's kind of frustrating, maybe a little bit draining, but it is
Mhm.
it is a really intense moment that is a defining moment between winning and or losing.
Awesome, awesome. So yeah, I'm in high pressure situations basically, and it requires you to take maybe an immediate decision. So uh,
Yeah, and can I add a little piece there too? When
sure,
I
sure,
think
sure.
about project managers, just so that we can contextually kind of add some context to this, when I think about project managers, this can range from interviews, those
Hmm.
on the spot questions where sometimes we just get choked up and we think we don't have the right answer, and it kind of boils down to just being authentic in that moment. But also live meetings. I know that more and more project
Right.
managers are being called to lead meetings, and then questions come to them. And I have a cool little story that I hope I can weave in here about my
Mhm.
first time being put on the spot in a meeting. And then there's that other piece where where the project manager is making a decision where the duty of loyalty diverges. So like my
Hmm.
personal values diverge from my professional values, and I need to make a decision that is going to be good for both me and my organization. And when we're not aligned to our organization, sometimes that can become very problematic. Those is where those
Hmm.
ethical type of decisions come in, but they're quick decisions. They're not
Right,
those
right.
ones that we get to go back to the drawing board, write out our racy chart, and
Mhm.
draw all our stick figures and all that. And so I do want to make the distinction of why I wrote the article the way that I did. I
Mhm.
want to call out so that people that are watching this, that the viewers really hone in on this is like the pre-decision making. This is pre-baking the oven
Mhm.
for
Love that.
decisions. Because
Mhm.
if we talk about the actual decision making process, there's a lot of research out there on how to make great decisions.
Right.
It's not a lot of research that puts us ahead of the curve of before you make a decision. What are some of those pre-baked sort of governance pillars that we'll call it that will help a project manager when they're in a pressure situation automatically
Awesome.
flip on that clutch decision
Love that.
switch. So we're not talking prescription. That's what I want to just
Mm.
call out. We're not saying do A, B, C, D. These things that we're going to talk about happen within a matter of seconds,
Right.
milliseconds.
Right. Right. Love that. Love that answer. So, when I was reading through and I got this term clutch performer as well, uh, which is often associated with athletes. What prompted you to draw parallels between athletes and project managers of all the people in the context of decision making, of course?
Yeah, it's a good one because I that's a really good question. Number one, my sister had me watching this movie, the series Ballers, and it's featuring John David Washington, and it's featuring The Rock, some people that some well-known actors that people may know. And there's this episode, I think I referenced season 3, episode 2, or something like that. But there's this moment where this athlete has this really crux decision to make on the spot in front of everyone, and it is it can cost him his entire career if he says A or B. One is going to
Mhm.
make him look really good, which is probably the lie, and then the other one is going to make him look really bad and make him forfeit millions of dollars. And so when I think about us as project managers, we come into these meetings, we come into ambiguity, we come into spaces where we're asked to make decisions all the time and not necessarily taught how to make those decisions. But if we take
Mhm.
the athletic approach, athletes train. They get into a muscle memory mode. A quick Google search on like clutch decision basketball, where everyone says, I'm going to go watch the highlights. We watch the highlights for the clutch moments. The crowd
Right,
goes,
right.
ah,
Mm.
crazy for the clutch moments. We, as project managers, we don't necessarily have thousands of people in the stands, but we usually have about 10 or 12 people looking at us in a meeting
Mm.
and looking for us to maneuver and make decisions. So the idea is taking the parallel approach of the muscle memory, the training, the coaching, the immense training that athletes go through in order to get to that place where they are comfortable in front of the crowd and they can take that shot or they know when to pass that ball. It's the same thing for us when we're in a meeting. I can't tell you how many times I have to pass the ball where I go, uh-oh, I find myself in a moment and I'm like, well, maybe the deputy CIO can answer that question, a little bit better than I can. And so that's
Mhm.
kind of like passing the ball, and it's a team sport. And so
Mhm.
I mean, we can go on and on about all the parallels there, but the main one is muscle memory, muscle memory.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Hmm.
Awesome. So I think you've beautifully defined what clutch moment is. You've made your case how project managers are required to uh, be, superheroes in those clutch moments, right? Now you've talked about four pillars that you've defined in that article. Let's
Yeah,
cover them one by one.
yeah.
So the first one is intellectual honesty and maturity. What do you mean by that?
Uh, Okay, I'm going to answer that one, but can I back up 1 second? Because I think that a context is going to help a little bit with the story.
Sure. Yeah.
Let's see if it does or doesn't. So I remember my first meeting where I was in a clutch moment. I'm sitting in the
Mhm.
room with the C-suites. I'm in higher education. I'm the project manager. I get in the meeting, and the first thing I'm thinking is, I know the status of the meeting. I know the rag, the red, amber, green, how things are going. And so I'm just spewing out all this stuff, and here's where we are, and here's where we're going. And the AVP, Associate Vice Provost at the time, said, "Okay, that's all good." But he asked me 3 questions. How is team morale going
Yeah.
on your project? And
Mhm.
I was like, "Talk about clutch moment." And then
Mhm.
so that one just went way over. It was like an airplane going over my head. And then he goes, "Where does this project fit into the strategic roadmap of the direction of the
Mhm.
organization?" And I'm thinking, what kind of meeting is this? And then the last question he asked, which I was stumped on, which was it was, how can I help you succeed?
Mm.
And I was not prepared for that. And as project managers, I think it's important that we prepare for those higher level clutch moments, not
Right.
just the project based, the definition of done and all that good stuff. So
Mm.
as we get into these pillars, I would like for the viewers to contextually put themselves in the same seat that I was sitting in
Mm.
front of these C-suites and executives coming into this project thinking, I got it all figured out. And then this ball comes in and you go, what do I do with it? So as we
Right.
think about the
Awesome.
pillars, let's kind of contextually put ourselves in that seat, if we will.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, love that.
Okay.
Thanks for setting that up. And we can, I think, now start off with the four pillars, I guess.
Yes, yes. Okay, so that first one you asked about was the intellectual honesty and maturity. Again, I want us to think about pillars as governance. So they're
Mhm.
they're like a guidepost, not necessarily prescriptive. But when we think about the intellectual piece, there is a level of maturity in decision making that we must have. And so when we think about that, it really boils down to our ethics, in my opinion, my humble opinion. It boils down
Mhm.
to our ethics and our decision making compass. So we talked a little bit earlier when we introduced the topic on that divergence of duty of loyalty between professional and personal. So if my ethical compass is like, I like to make money, but
Right.
I'm working at an organization that is service based, and I come into a decision where I can take a bribe, which by the way is unethical, but I can take a bribe in order to do something to get this project moving forward.
Mm.
That's where that ethical compass or that intellectual maturity and honesty comes in, where we kick it up a notch and say, wait a minute, something's off. We can call it gut feeling, we can call it common sense, but it's something's off. Let me click into um, is this really what I want to do here?
Mm.
And why am I doing this thing? We start off with that why. Why is this even, a part of my ethical decision making process at this point?
Awesome, awesome. And
Yeah.
the second pillar that you talked about was I was sort of a little bit taken aback by that because you
Oh,
mentioned political savvy, and usually out there, what you get to hear when it comes to politics at workplace and all that is, just stay away from politics. Don't get involved and stay far, far away and just focus on your work. But you made a really good point. You basically talked about how someone should be able to navigate the political landscape of an organization. Tell us more about that.
that is, it's not one of my hardest ones, but it was coming into project management and then elevating into PMO and portfolio manager. It was those are different layers. They are different
Right.
roles that
Mm.
require different viewpoints. And so the higher up we go in our roles, uh, it's important to remember we're standing at the balcony view. We still got to get in the weeds, but we got to stand at the balcony view as well and watch everything. The first thing
Mhm.
I want to say is office politics are different from organizational politics. So
Right.
petty fights and little things that go on, that is office politics. I am in
Mhm.
no way saying, yeah, become very well versed in how to navigate office politics.
Awesome.
That's one thing.
Mm.
I say avoid that, at all
Mhm.
costs. But organizational politics is really boils down to where the landmines are. We call them old guards. The old guards know who is who the key players are.
Mm.
Don't go over there. Yeah, if you're in a meeting, don't give pushback in this particular context. Take it offline. It is
Right.
it is knowing how to maneuver and how to kind
Mm.
of
Love that.
switch the light bulb on and off, even when to withhold, when to
Mhm.
just sit in the meeting and not even nod, but just
Mhm.
stay straight faced and be attentive and present.
Right.
All of that has to do with political savviness. And if
Mhm.
we take it up a notch, whether we are doing it intentionally or not, people are watching how we behave
Right.
behind the scenes and on the scenes. And so the behind the scene political savvy piece is that whole thing of coelevation, teamwork, cooperation, checking on your
Mm.
team members. We just don't necessarily call it political savvy, but that is
Right.
how we get that organizational political equity built up over time, in
Love
my
that.
opinion. Yeah.
Love that. Love that. Yeah. Thank you for describing that way. A lot of people just tend to read the word politics, and that's where
And
our
get
mind
scared.
goes,
I
right?
used to as well. I used to as
Right.
well. Joel
Mm.
De Luca wrote a book on it called Political Savvy:
Wow.
Leadership Behind the Scenes. And
Mhm.
my current CIO of UCLA Anderson, Howard Miller, gave that book to me within the first 3 weeks of me working
Wow.
in that
Mm.
environment, and I've carried it with me throughout my whole journey at UCLA Anderson because of that reason, because it is a really good perspective changer on not thinking of politics from that office politics space, but the bigger picture.
Yeah. Thanks for that nuanced explanation of the topic. Let's talk about the third pillar, which is agility in
Oh,
ambiguity. And,
yes.
you know, ambiguity is something many of us struggle with, right? So how do we go about this?
That one, I actually wrote in the article that is the
Mhm.
one that I struggle with the most. And that
Right.
is because of my propensity to want to perfect things. And so
Mm.
if we talk about two different superheroes, and I talked about this in the article, so it's relevant, Batman, Superman. Superman just jets out. I watched the cartoon series, it's like Superman doesn't even, he's just automatically prepared. I don't know how.
Mm.
I am more of the Batman. I'm like, I got a plan. Even if I plan in my head and it's not extensive, I got to have some type of guiding post to get and
Mm.
navigate to where I'm at. And so that agility and ambiguity, it's almost like a paradox, because how can you be agile in an ambiguous situation?
Ambiguous.
But
Mm.
it is a leadership trait that I admire in some of the most um, modern leaders and project managers that I've ever sat around is that I see them being able to become really adaptable and flexible, but still maintain a level of authenticity and a level of ethics that doesn't veer away from values, but definitely helps to navigate the storm in the clutch when things are
Right.
going off
Mm.
off track, when someone is taking a meeting to a different route, even if they're a C-suite, being able to say, oh wait 1 second, let's table that and maneuver versus letting that thing just go wherever it goes. It does
Right. Right.
require getting comfortable in discomfort, and we hear that a
Mhm.
lot, but it does require that just becoming very present and in the moment.
Awesome. Awesome. And then the last part is relational mobility. What do you mean by that?
Oh
What are we
yeah.
talking about here?
That one is one of my favorites. It's what we're doing right now. We're
Mm-hmm.
we're just building relationship equity. And let's put us back in that meeting scenario, right?
Mm-hmm.
That I brought us to in the beginning. If I'm in that meeting and I've built up relational mobility with people, some equity, some good behind the scenes stuff, and they have my back and we've built trust and all those things we talk about, when I get in that meeting, they're going to jump in and help me and vice
Mm-hmm.
versa. It's
Mm-hmm.
going to be a team sport, going back to the
Right.
athletic point of view, a team sport on all of our parts where we're bouncing that ball. But we know where we're trying to get that ball to, but we may have to pass it around a few times before we, take the shot.
Right.
This also goes into, I think it's not Debbie Covey, that's PMI LA's president. It is Stephen Covey that talks about putting first things first. And
Mm-hmm.
and I think in all these pillars, this is one of the most important where we put people first. People over projects, people over processes. Project
Mm-hmm.
and processes can get, ranked how they are,
Mm-hmm.
but always the people part is the most important because the people are the
Love that.
ones getting the stuff done. And I talk a little bit in the article about forgiving. Forgive,
Mm-hmm.
forget, and move on. It's very hard to fly fast and fly high with a lot of baggage, with a lot of
Mm-hmm.
unforgiveness, anger, undealt with issues, and petty
Absolutely.
office politics stuff.
Right.
So it's extremely important, I think, that relationship or relational mobility is something that new and seasoned project managers have top of mind.
Awesome. Awesome. Love that. So, one other thing that you mentioned in the article was decidophobia. And
Oh
I'm
yeah,
assuming we are talking about, overcoming fear, some sort of fear, or maybe even procrastination in a
yeah,
situation which could be high stakes decision making scenario, right? Where
yeah,
you just are procrastinating, right? What exactly is
exactly.
decidophobia, and how can, project managers overcome this?
Okay, well, that's a loaded one because I don't know if we can overcome decidophobia. I think we all
Mhm.
have a little bit of that in us where,
Right.
depending on the stakes, how high the
Mhm.
stakes are, we will, if we could freeze, flight, or whatever those three are, we will freeze and we will leave. We will do it and
Mhm.
fight. We will do anything to get out of the situation.
Right, right.
There's a philosopher, and I'm thinking his name is Walter Kaufman, or I know it's Walter something, Walter K, and he's the one who I picked up this word from, decidophobia. He didn't go into
Mhm.
too many details like of what it was, except for that aspect of when we feel that inherent risk, when we're in a circumstance that the risk tolerance is not high, where it is an adverse risk scenario. There's this space in us where we just can freeze up, and I want people, viewers, to recognize it doesn't mean freezing up and it's like this,
Mhm.
like that. It's freezing and punting. It's going,
Mhm.
it's not taking accountability. It's trying
Right.
to offload that thing to someone. We call it, I don't know if you heard the term, um, throwing people under the bus. That is a
Yeah.
decidophobia
Mhm.
tactic where it wasn't me, or
Mhm.
that person forgot to do that. It is
Right.
not, it is that act of not taking accountability. So decidophobia doesn't necessarily have to mean literally freezing and not being able to
Mhm.
make a decision. Even the inaction is a decision, and punting
Wow.
or offloading something to someone else is a decision as well that could be
Mhm.
driven by fear instead of positive outcomes.
Awesome. Awesome. Love that. So,
Yeah.
uh, you now conclude by comparing clutch performers to superheroes, something that you mentioned earlier as well. And I really wanted to know your thoughts around it. Do you think project managers are naturally Superman or they are naturally Batman, or can they evolve to
Oh,
master, the both side of things here?
oh, that's a good setup right there. Okay. Um, that's a good setup. Let's see. I'm going to start by saying this is a fascinating question, number one. Uh, we're going to go back to the world of sports on this one just a little bit before I answer the question. Um,
Yeah.
Athletes have this thing in athletics. There's this person called a sports psychology consultant. I just heard of this
Mhm.
recently. I didn't know this at first. And they train athletes in how to think and use different techniques. One of the techniques they'll train athletes in is in trigger words. And those trigger words are used during really intense moments where the person just says that trigger word to remember, let me recenter so that I can execute on whatever this task is or whatever this decision is. So
Mhm.
essentially, I think it's going to boil down to if a person when a project manager is faced with a decision, do they go into a challenge state or into a
Mhm.
threat state? It really
Oh, I love that.
depends. And I think it
Mm.
depends on the circumstance. Again, the high stakes. If it's a low level decision and it just affects one person, it might not feel like threatening. But if it
Mm.
feels a little bit threatening or like I can lose a lot if I make this decision, we tend to, as I think people, just go into the threat state. I think it takes
Mm.
training and massaging to get in the state of finding excitement in that moment and saying, you know
Mm.
what, this is an opportunity for me to activate my four pillars. This is an
Right.
opportunity for me to activate my inner superhero as Superman or Batman. So
Mhm.
I don't necessarily want to prescribe that we are naturally one or the other. I think that
Mhm.
we should be able to switch in between both. If I'm running into a burning building, I have a friend
Mhm.
that does construction and
Yeah.
welding and they get into these tight spaces and I would be in a threat state,
Right.
regardless if I had to, maneuver a type of project like that. So I think it again goes into that challenge state where we're the blood is flowing, we're excited,
Mm.
we're ready to go, glucose, oxygen is going around, and we just feel confident and good versus when conversely we're under pressure and in that threat state, the cortisol starts to
So good.
release and muscles start, restricting and all that
Yeah.
good stuff. So I really think it depends on the individual, but I think we can play around with both in scenarios and make the best of them.
Love that. Love that. So good. So, finally, my last question here would be any key takeaway from you to for the project managers, of course, so that they
Mhm.
can excel as clutch performers. What would that be in our careers?
Yeah, I think that's a good question too. I'm gonna do two things. I'm gonna leave us with a quote, but I think that there are a lot of assessments out there that
Mhm.
will help. Not necessarily that the assessments are great and they're just bulletproofed, but they help us to think about our thinking. And so I
Mm.
did some assessments recently. One was called LEAD, LEAD. It was a leader effectiveness and adaptability assessment. Most people have heard of Meyer-Briggs assessments.
Mm.
There's also one called the Big Five. I know that UCLA does that one, and we did it. And there's a lot of good, even love languages
Mm.
assessment to know
Mm.
what fills our tank up and how we
Mm.
show up to our personal and professional lives. I think there's a lot of good material out there to help us to take those self assessments. Another plug that I'll say is going to and PMI LA events, especially at the beginning of my career, the live events was
Mhm.
very helpful because I
No,
would challenge
totally.
myself to raise my hand
Mm.
in the most it's 50 people in the room and they're like, "Do you
Mm.
have any questions?" And I'm like, "Nope." Then I'm thinking I got about 50 in my head, but I don't want to sound crazy or I don't want to
Right.
sound, like I don't know what I'm talking about. So
Mm.
I think it's important to get out of our comfort zone, to go into environments that challenge us, to raise our hand, learn the art of asking good questions, and then interact and engage with other people, build up that relational mobility,
Mhm.
so that we can practice. I don't know that we can, no different than an athlete. I don't think that we can get the muscle memory that is required to be a clutch performer unless we develop the muscle in real time scenarios and exercises. And I
Awesome.
don't know if
Awesome.
we're wrapping up, but if we do, I do want to just end with a type of quote that just is inspiring to me,
Oh, please
hopefully, and
do.
to others.
Yes, yes,
Oh,
please
good.
do, please
Okay.
do.
So I wrote a different article too, and it's not a plug for that one. It's I
Mm,
wrote a different article, and in that entire article, I used only one resource. One resource.
mm,
This is how powerful that one resource was. And so there's a quote from the late Dr. Martin Luther King from way back in 1967. So this is like 6 months, I think, before he got assassinated. And I don't, I'm not promoting the entire speech that he gave, but there's a part in here that I want clutch performers to remember, because this is not a blanketed
mhm.
thing. This is not something that, once you learn this, everything is going to be great. It's
Yeah,
just like
right.
anything else. Try it,
Absolutely.
see if it works. If it doesn't, great.
Mm,
But this is what he said, and it's a speech in your life's blueprint. I want to suggest some things that you should begin to put into your life's blueprint. Number one is your life should have a you in your life you should have a deep belief in your own dignity, your worth, and your somebodyness. Don't allow anybody to tell you that you're nobody. Always feel that you count, and always feel that you have a worth, and always feel that your life has an ultimate significance. This is so important for clutch performers, for anyone who is trying to go from one state to the next, anyone who's
mm,
trying to promote out of project coordinator, project manager,
mm,
PMO, portfolio manager,
mm,
regardless of where you at. Just, I want people to know they are enough.
mm.
Yeah.
Awesome, awesome. Love that. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for bringing this positive energy on this episode.
Yay.
And it has been a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you for taking the time out to join us today. And I'm sure our community is going to really enjoy this conversation.
Yay. Thank you so much. I'll see y'all soon.